Welcome to the Dash Mindset Podcast. I'm Sherry Zievenbergen. You were born, you're gonna die, and your adventure is your dash in between. So make the most of it. Unlock your potential in all aspects of your dash by embracing your uniqueness and living in a way that's authentic to you, not by doing more things, but by focusing on the right things. I'm a former corporate leader turned coach who's on my own journey, and I'm passionate about helping you on your journey too. So on the podcast, we'll explore how to live authentically by deciphering who you truly are and what you truly want. Are you ready to take a step toward designing your dash? Someday doesn't actually exist, so let's do it now. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with the Dash Mindset Podcast today. Today, I'm excited to welcome my guest, Dr. Amy Climer. And this is just going to be a really fun episode. She's full of wisdom about creativity. And the reason I really wanted to have Amy here is, well, I just love all the wisdom and knowledge she shares, but also because we so often, and I'm saying we as humankind, I guess, so often limit ourselves. Each of us is limiting ourselves in some way. And it's often based upon what we've been conditioned to believe, what someone said to us once in fifth grade or college, or, what our siblings said or whatever. And Amy is helping people who want to be more creative, but don't know where to start. And creativity is one of those things that a lot of us think we either have or we don't. Often think we don't. So please join me in hearing Amy's story today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background. She teaches teams and organizations how to increase their creativity so they can maximize innovation. And she works with companies such as Mayo Clinic, Stanford University, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. She has a podcast herself, the Deliberate Creative Podcast, where she shares practical advice and strategies to help leaders and innovative teams. And she has a PhD in leadership and change and is a certified speaking professional. So with all of that, Amy, I would love to hand it over to you to share a little bit about yourself and share maybe as you share in your book. Oh, I got to step back and say that about what led you down this path. But first, I need to mention you're also the soon-to-be best-selling author of a book that will be released on February 26th. So, okay, I'll let you take it from there.
Yes. Thank you, Sherry. It's so good to be here. Yes, I'm super excited. I have this new book coming out. It's called Deliberate Creative Teams, How to Lead for Innovative Results. It's coming out February 26th. I'm super excited. It's this culmination of a lot of what I've been doing in my career. Based on the research I did for my PhD, which was on creativity in teams, as well as the work I do as a consultant with all sorts of organizations, from really small nonprofits with 4 staff members to, big companies with thousands of people. So that's a little bit about like me kind of in relation to the book. But yeah, so I love that I get to be a consultant and keynote speaker and trainer. And yeah, we can dig into all of that.
Something I don't think I've asked you yet, Amy, is what path did you start going down, or what's the path you thought you would take at one point in life?
There have been many paths I thought I would take. My undergrad degree is in biology, and I was focusing on ecology and environmental science. I had this interest at some point in studying marine mammals. And I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and at some point in my maybe middle school, high school, I had a season pass to SeaWorld. And we would go there as a family. And I would just ask my dad to please leave me at the dolphin feeding pool all day. And I just wanted to stay there all day.
I love it.
That is so usually cool. Leave me for about an hour. And then he's like, okay, that's I don't want to leave you all day here.
We need to leave. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, so I have not read your entire book because, as I was telling you before we started, I'm old school. So even though I have a digital version, which I very much appreciate, I need a book to actually, turn the pages up.
Totally get it.
I did read your intro and loved the story you shared about how you were led to believe that you lack creativity, that you're just not creative, and how that played into your life and what you're doing now. I'd love for you to share that story.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think growing up, I got a lot of conflicting messages about creativity. there were certain parts of my childhood where my mom was really good at helping my sister and brother and I, be creative and make things. But then there were some other messages that I was getting that was like, just do this as a hobby. Don't take this too far. But my freshman year of college, as I mentioned, I was a biology major. So my freshman year, I signed up for this class called Studio Art for Non-Majors, meaning people not majoring in art. And the first day of class, the teacher said to us, if you don't have artistic talent, you are not going to do well in this class. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, this is for non-art majors. Why do we need talent? And then I thought, jerk.
I will show you.
Exactly. I was like, well, you know what? I probably have some talent. I'm going to stick it out and see what happens.
Right.
And so I did. And there were about 20 of us in the class, and we really bonded over this guy's ridiculous teaching style. And he would, most of the first half of the semester was all about drawing. And so there'd be, we'd show up and there'd be a still life or a live model. And we would be sitting in a circle, all drawing from our little, these seated easel things. And he would just walk around and give feedback. And I always sat next to this guy, this person not in the book, but I always sat next to this guy who really was not a good drawer. But I loved him because he was really funny. And so he would just crack me up the whole class. But when the teacher got to him, he would get so frustrated. He said, no, you need to hold your pencil lightly. And this guy had a really heavy line, and the teacher's trying to show him how to sketch. And so he would take his pencil and he would sketch on the page. And then he would say, yeah, like that. And so he would go off, and the guy and I would kind of roll our eyes at each other, and he would go around the room. And about 30 minutes later, he'd be back over to our side, and he would look at the guy's paper and say, oh, well, this section looks really good. And I'm like, seriously? That's the part you just drew 30 minutes ago. Come on, dude. So anyway, but the thing is, he just berated us all semester. And what happened is, even though we were laughing about it and kind of thought it was all ridiculous, the message kind of seeped in for me that by the end of the semester, I really felt like I wasn't creative. And up until that point in my life, I had pretty much regularly was doing something artistic or musical. And I really don't have any musical talent, but it was always in band or something. And after that, I didn't do anything for the rest of my college career. And it wasn't until maybe a year or two after college, and I stumbled upon the book, The Artist's Way, where I started to understand what had happened to me. But then later, even further after that, in the early 2000s, I was lecturing, long story, but I was lecturing in a lot of quilt guilds. And after I would talk about this concepts of creativity, all these people would come up to me and say, oh, I had that same story. And that my third grade teacher did the same thing. My fifth grade teacher, everybody had a story of a teacher or a parent or a neighbor that told them they weren't creative. And now here we are as adults who are in the world. We need to be creative in our work. Almost any type of job needs some creativity. And we have these messages that tell us we can't do that and we're not good enough. And, even if, somebody listening is a manager and they weren't told those messages, chances are the people they work with were.
Absolutely. And whatever message they did receive, whether it was you are creative or you aren't, that plays into how they define creativity for their team as well.
Yes.
I mean, it impacts everyone. So a couple things I love about the class you took. One, I can't imagine the level of creativity that one person has prevented from entering the world. How many people do you think dropped the class after he said, you're basically going to suck and fail?
Yeah, I think
don't do well.
There were definitely people that dropped. Maybe, it was a small class to start with, maybe 30 people, and then maybe there were 20 or something, or maybe there was 25 right. And ended up being 18 or 20. And, maybe that was part of his point, was I don't want to teach all these people. Let's get this
right.
smaller,
right.
which he was very successful at.
Mission accomplished. Well done.
Exactly. I don't know how many people, left feeling the same thing as me. I ended up transferring schools after that year and went to a different school, not because of him per se, but so I didn't stay in touch with any of the other students. But Yeah, that would be interesting to know.
And the fact that, first of all, it's funny that he told the gentleman next to you that that was really good, what he had done when he wasn't even the one who had done it.
He had to know. I was like, really?
Really? But also, creativity is so subjective. I mean, for someone to think, oh, this is either good or bad, is just so interesting to me. Now, I suspect he had some level of talent around, art and creativity and whatever. But to just say it's good or bad is just so interesting because it is subjective. So,
well, and that, it was based in that case on drawing. And I don't remember if the message was you're not creative or if it was you can't draw. But either way, I interpreted it as I wasn't creative. And there is so much confusion or this connection between our ability to draw and creativity. And the reality is they're not, there's maybe a small overlap in the sense that if you're creative, you can draw better perhaps, but your ability to draw has nothing to do with your ability to be creative. And I think that's a real misnomer that we struggle with.
Well, something I've thought about throughout my life, and, a lot of this kind of came out just based on my conversation with you, because so much of this is subconscious. We don't even realize what's going on in our brains. But I would just equate creativity with being artistic, being able to draw, pottery, all those kinds of things. And I think I mentioned to you that I did really well in my 7th grade creative writing class.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I am creative, or I was creative in 7th grade creative writing class. And then I went down the path later of going into accounting and finance where, it's basically understood or assumed that, creativity isn't required because it's all numbers, right? So I just kept thinking, well, okay, there was that time in 7th grade where I was creative at writing specifically, and now I'm just not. So I would love to know, I know in your book you share this, how do you define creativity?
Yeah. So the definition that I use, which is not one I made up, this comes from the research literature in creativity and innovation, which is that creativity is novelty that is valuable. That's it. So to break that down, novelty meaning something new, original, unique, different, and valuable meaning, it could be financially valuable, not necessarily. It could be emotionally valuable, intellectually. It could just be fun. Like, oh, that was just cool, right? That's worth it. And so anyway, creativity is novelty that is valuable. It has nothing to do with your ability to draw or your ability to make art.
Oh, I love that. And another thing is we each define creativity differently too. So we're going around saying we're not creative, or, at least subconsciously thinking it, and we define creativity differently too. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you work with individuals and teams on this. I know you have a specific approach. One thing that I love that you say is that you really need to be deliberate. And it's not something that just happens and, these are my words, not yours, but, you meditate for, 2 days or you get a muse or whatever. You need to be deliberate, and there is an approach that you can use. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yes, I do believe that you're not going to just accidentally be creative. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It's part of our humanness. Just for the fact that anyone who's listening, you're human, and you have in your DNA the ability to be creative. You have in your DNA the ability to come up with new approaches, new directions, new ideas, whatever it is that are both novel and valuable. The challenge we have is that, it's like anything else in life, that if you want to be good at it, you have to practice it. You need to learn more about it. You need to understand how it works. And that doesn't happen for us. Most people, if you were raised in sort of mainstream United States education system, you were not taught anything about creativity unless you had just an exceptional teacher that was kind of doing this extra thing, We are taught how to find the one right answer. Every multiple choice test question, all standardized tests are based on what's right or what's not, facts. And of course, that's not what creativity is about. And then we become adults and now we're asked to be creative. So when I'm working with individuals, I definitely help them grapple with those messages that they might have gotten, that confusion, and help them learn, hey, here's what creativity is. But the other part about creativity that I think is important to mention is there is a social judgment to it. And that's why so many of us might say, yeah, no, I'm actually not creative. Because I relate it to leadership. It's, you don't get to choose if you're a good leader or not. That is up for the people you are working with. They're the ones that will say if you're a good leader or not. Now, hopefully you are striving to be a good leader and you're continually learning and growing and reflecting and getting feedback. And creativity is the same thing. Like, you don't decide necessarily if you're creative. I mean, you can say to yourself, yes, I'm a creative person, and you can own it, which is healthy. That's actually very good. But at the end of the day, other people will make that judgment on you. And just like leadership, you need to practice it, learn more about it, understand how it works, get feedback. And we just haven't really built that into our schools or our businesses in the way that I think we should. So when I'm working with teams, I will teach them more about, the processes and how it works, and we'll kind of dig more into that so they understand it better.
Oh, that's great. What would you say helps a leader understand, hey, you know what we need? We need Amy to come in and help us be more creative. Because oftentimes it's kind of viewed as one of those soft skills or just kind of unnecessary, right? Like, oh, well, that's just extra. So who really reaches out to you, and what finally leads someone to believe, hey, we need to bring Amy in?
Yeah. Well, first I would say the people that reach out to me, they already want to be creative. They understand this is important. Every once in a while, someone asks me like, hey, how do you convince people they need to be creative? I'm like, oh no, I don't do that. What I can share is there's a lot of value in being creative and being innovative. I firmly believe that it is only the organizations who are able and willing to innovate who will continue to thrive. And we are seeing that. I mean, I'm sure that every generation says this, but we're truly seeing that now more than ever. Like, I mean, even, 5 years ago when the COVID pandemic hit, organizations' ability to respond to that was related to their ability to innovate, because that's what they had to do. They had to be able to make changes. And there were many organizations, and I certainly saw them, and I imagine you did too, who were like, nah, we're just going to let this ride out. Yeah, it's not going to be that big a deal, right? And 6 months later, they're freaking out because they're about to go out of business. Mm-hmm. I know where I live in Asheville, North Carolina, a place with a lot of really good restaurants. We have multiple James Beard chefs here, even though we're a small city. Man. And most restaurants are like, okay, let's figure out how to do takeout really well, or they got really creative. But some were like, no, we're not a takeout restaurant. Like, well, suit yourself, because now you can't make any money. You're having to fire all your employees. And so, and that's like one tiny, tiny example. There are countless examples of organizations who were unwilling and unable to pivot and make changes when they needed to. We could, Blockbuster, Kodak, many colleges who have gone out of business because they weren't able to, be more innovative. And the list goes on, right? So even organizations and companies have been around for decades or a century are still at risk if they're not able to change and adapt. And I think right now in 2025, that big thing that's here is AI. And what's your response? How are you going to consider it? And there's all sorts of other things too. It's not just AI. That's just one example. But I think when organizations resist, then they slowly wither away and they'll go out of business.
It's interesting because we talk about individuals having limiting beliefs, and we identify ourselves in a certain way, but organizations, like you said, do the same thing. They dig their heels in and say, we are not X. We are not a takeout restaurant. And it's interesting to think about an organization, clearly it's the leadership within the organization, but an organization taking on a certain identity like that, which then limits everyone within the organization. Because, there were probably people in at the restaurant who thought, you know what, maybe we could figure this out. I might have some great ideas, but unless they are welcomed and actually appreciated, then that's going to continue to limit somebody. And, who knows? Maybe people lost their jobs because of it. It's just...
I'm sure many people lost their jobs because of it. And I do think it is so important to recognize that, whoever's the leader is, or the manager, whatever that person or that group of people, they are not the only ones with the good ideas. I mean, that's just ridiculous to think that they would be. Of course, it's going to be people all throughout the organization that are going to have good ideas or new perspectives, or even maybe they don't have an idea, but they're able to recognize problems in different ways. And, we all have different strengths and perspectives. And so when groups can come together and actually be a team and work well together, teams are the number one source of innovation in organizations. That is not my opinion. That is backed up by loads of research. Even if you look at patents and who's applied for a patent over the last 100 years, we're seeing more and more group patents over the last, I don't remember, it was like 20, 30 years, that it's unlikely for individuals to come up with a new thing. It's going to be teams that are working together. And so I've developed these elements that teams need if they want to be creative together, which we can get into if you'd like.
I would love to, please.
Okay. Yeah. So there's 3 elements, and this comes out of research that I did as part of my dissertation. Teams, if they want to be creative together, they need a strong team purpose, a shared purpose that everyone believes in and understands. They need to have strong team dynamics, meaning they need to be able to trust each other, they communicate well, and they're able to engage in some conflict around the concepts and the ideas that they're looking at. So team purpose, team dynamics, and the last one is team creative process. So do they have a process where they're following that process to be more creative together? And I have a process that I teach. It's called creative problem solving. Other ones are design thinking, human-centered design. There's many of them out there. All of them are good. And it doesn't I don't really think about it as a whole lot which one you follow because they're so similar, but as long as everyone knows what it is. What I found is that most teams and most leaders don't even know that there's a creative process that they should be considering. So that's the place that's the hardest. But all of that together is called the deliberate creative team model.
It's interesting how much effort is required for each of those on their own, right? I mean, when you talk about team dynamics, they just need to be trusting. They need to have healthy conflict. I mean, we could talk all day about just one of those things, right?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about conflict? Because, so I'm in the Midwest. We're Midwest nice.
Yes.
Not that you're rude in Asheville, right? But that is just generally frowned upon. And I mean, I've been in meetings where each of the individuals within the meeting are limited because there's one person who says, we tried that. It didn't work. Okay, maybe it was in 1982, but still, we've tried it. It doesn't work. So then everyone just shuts down. So can you talk just a little bit about conflict and how that looks in the teams you work with?
Yeah, that's such a great example. There's actually a story later on, I think it's chapter 2, where I share something almost exactly like what you just said, because we've all had that experience, right?
Yeah.
You're in a team, there's a moment of, let's brainstorm. And then somebody, people are sharing ideas. And it always seems to be like the 3rd or 4th idea that comes up. Yes. Somebody says, oh no, we did that in 1982. Oh gosh, this one moment that did happen. I think the guy actually said 1982. And I just bust out laughing. Now, this was years ago, but it was still a long time after 1982. And I bust out laughing in the middle of the meeting because I thought he was joking because it was so funny. And then he gave me this look and I was like, oh, he's not joking. He's serious. Really? I mean, I about lost it because that's even worse. Anyway, whatever. But we've all had that experience. And I think that one of the reasons because that would basically be a poor team dynamic, like, right? But there's so many layers of why that's happening that are actually quite easy to address. So one of them is, like in this team that I was on when this happened, and it certainly wasn't the only time, but we had never talked about how to brainstorm well together or how to generate ideas. There were some assumed rules, but no, we had never gotten explicit about it. We had never talked about a creative process or how we might approach a particular problem. And I actually think if we had done those two things, and if we were using a process to be creative together, that ideation session would have gone really well, because this was a smart group of people that had lots of ideas. And I knew that because I'd have great conversations in the hall with them. I was like, oh, why didn't you say that in the meeting? And I know I didn't say it in the meeting because I didn't feel comfortable saying it at the meeting.
Because what happened in 1982. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And if we just sometimes address the process, that can really shift the dynamics. And I know, because of some things that happened later, that guy meant well. He was not trying to be a jerk. He wasn't trying to be a naysayer. He was afraid that we were going to implement something that he thought was a bad idea.
And he didn't want to waste the time.
Right. But with a good process, there's a way to, let's get all those ideas out first. Let's engage in this divergent thinking mode of we're just generating lots of ideas. And then after we've done that, then let's shift over to a convergent thinking mode where we're evaluating and assessing the ideas. But because we had never talked about that, we were mixing those two approaches at the same time. And he didn't know there'd be an opportunity for editing or evaluating. And so he jumped in. And I think that's a good example. We're like, okay, if we have a clear process, it will actually improve team behavior and we will work better together.
Right. Oh, that's so good. And I mean, throughout my experience, a lot of times in organizations, the discussion is, oh, let's brainstorm. Let's have a brainstorm session. And that's just common knowledge or common language that no one really ever defines. And then it's, there are probably going to be some sticky notes and then you put them up, but you're never told, oh, wait, you know what? Don't rule out Bob's statement about 1982, or maybe Bob, could you just hold off a bit about 1982? There's no structure provided because it's a brainstorming session. So it almost feels like, or maybe it assumed that if you provide some level of a structure, then it's not a brainstorming session, but it's the exact opposite. It'd be an effective one, right?
Yes. And actually, that is such a good point, is that often there's this myth that in order for people to be creative, they need just like full reign, could do whatever they want. When actually, research has shown that if we have some parameters and some limitations, we'll end up being more creative. And actually, the structure can help us. And there's kind of two things I said there. One is the structure, which can help, but then also some other limitations can also be helpful. And sometimes forcing us to be creative, like, well, we have to follow this law. Like, this actually comes up in your field a lot, right? Like accounting and finance, right? Please follow the law. I'm a big fan of that. And given this law or this compliance element, how do we then do this? Without being sneaky or conniving about it, just trying to figure out how do we work within what we have. And there's all sorts of possibilities that many people have come up for. We could go on for days with examples, but the limitations are not necessarily a bad thing, and neither is the structure. Yeah, structure can actually be really helpful.
And that makes me think too that there are so many highly regulated environments that the thought process is, oh, we have to follow these guidelines. We have to, abide by this law. And then we just kind of stop there and think about, well, then we have to go through a very systematic process, which is not creative because creativity doesn't even come into play in most, people's minds. But I just love the work you're doing. And there's not really a team who couldn't benefit from this.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, even though I'm a big fan of innovation and creativity, I do believe we don't need it all the time. So there are cases where there are teams who their job is to maintain something or keep something going as it is. And so maybe they don't need to be highly creative, although I do think they can still benefit from some level of creativity. In fact, recently I worked with a big manufacturing company where, for the most part, manufacturing is like, hey, we're trying to keep things going. We don't want to, especially if you think about like an assembly line is all about just like doing the same thing over and over again. But there's always opportunities for some inefficiencies or inconsistencies, or, oh, this thing always gets bogged down, or this thing breaks. And so even in organizations where you don't need to be creative every day, but you still need it in order to, be more effective or efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just changing your frame of mind and just thinking about something differently. Because even assembly lines, maybe there's a guy who's taking 20 steps more than he needs to, or something like that. But we just all get stuck on autopilot and we don't even realize. Okay, I would love, Amy, to take this back to an individual level just a little bit, and a couple examples or experiences that I've had that I'll kind of start with. So, like I said, I went into accounting and finance. I thought, oh, I'm not creative. I didn't, consciously think about that, but it just never occurred to me that I had creativity. And I remember a conversation with someone, I don't remember who the someone was, but at one point in my career who said, you're creative, Sherry. You're creative when you create spreadsheets. Now, I realize how exciting that sounds, but truly, I can make a kick-ass spreadsheet.
Hey, I appreciate a good spreadsheet.
And so it is valuable in that if it's easy to read, if it provides the information someone needs, all these things. And I just remember that moment where I thought, well, yeah, just thinking about a spreadsheet differently. I mean, there's so many ways to incorporate this. And I was actually having a conversation with a client recently who is in the medical field. And I do assessments with people and was talking through, she, one of her results was that she uses creativity to help people. Mm-hmm. And she's thinking, I'm in the medical field. What are you talking about? But she is creative at creating a particular environment, a warm environment for patients, and ensuring they, that she's empathetic with them, that she has the background required to really build rapport with them, all these things. So she's creative in that way. And, we don't think about creativity when it comes to finance or the medical environment or any of these things. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, okay, so I said I want to take this to an individual level, and now I'm switching gears here, but you work with Mayo. So let's go down both of those paths. I'll let you choose which one, but you work with Mayo. And Mayo, I mean, they need to be creative because they're Mayo, right? Can you give an example of where someone can be creative, or how an organization can be creative in a way that they probably don't think of themselves as needing to be creative? Mm-hmm. And then we can go down the individual route.
Yeah. I mean, oh gosh, I think in healthcare, there's so many, I'm sure many people would not be alive. I could say I would not have been born had it not been for innovation in healthcare, because my mom's life was saved due to innovation. And I know there are so many people that have that same experience. In fact, just earlier this month, my wife and I both got sick, and she had the flu, and she had more than once had her fever spiked up to 105 degrees. Which,
oh man.
Right. Like that's really dangerous. But of course, like she's on it with the Tylenol, and within 15, 20 minutes, it had dropped down to 102. And then a little while later, it was like 99. Right. And I thought, okay, if it wasn't for Tylenol or, ibuprofen, these kind of things, she wouldn't be alive today. Just from that moment. I mean, or at the very least would have had brain damage potentially from having the flu. So, I mean, that's a tiny example. Well, I mean, I should say it's a micro.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big thing. I mean, Tylenol is huge in our world, but I say small just in that it's one little sliver. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need innovation in everything. I mean, I just was talking to a healthcare organization. They reached out to me. They're doing a 7-month leadership development program for managers, and they wanted me to come in and be one of the speakers later this year. And she said that when I was talking to the client, she said that the biggest challenge they have is that the managers are really good at the day-to-day, but they're not that great at how do they look ahead? How do they get more creative given all the other responsibilities they have. And so that's something we'll dig into. But, and I know that's not unique to healthcare. I mean, I even struggle with that myself, and I understand creativity really well, right? We all, yeah. So, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. And I don't even know if it was a question. It was more of a, hey, talk about this, Amy. Okay, so now we'll go down the route that thank you for sharing all of that. We'll go down the individual route. I would love for you to share, and I don't know that this is something you have at the forefront of your brains, which is fine, but what's a tip you could share with an individual that would help them find their own creativity? Because they have it somewhere within them. Do you have a tip or just a suggestion of some sort that you could share?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go with some very practical things that are very little, but I found to be really impactful, certainly for myself. Okay, so I'm going to go back to where we talked about divergent and convergent thinking briefly. That our brain cannot do the both of those types of thinking at the same time. And so it's very important for us to literally separate them out. And I think that as an individual, if you can, whatever challenge you have going on, think to yourself, okay, how might I approach this challenge? And just write down a few ideas and try really, really hard not to judge yourself. I mean, that is our biggest culprit, right? We judge ourselves, and that gets in our way. And see if you can get, probably without thinking too hard, you can get 3 or 4 ideas, but can you get 10? How about 15 or 20? Maybe start asking some other people and tell them, I want you to give me the weirdest, wackiest idea of how to solve this problem, and just see what they say to you. And all sorts of people, maybe your parents or your kids or your neighbors or people that aren't really connected to this specific problem, and see what you come up with. And what might happen is that you start looking at the problem in a different way, and you start seeing ideas that you had never thought of before. And then after you have that list, whether it's 10, 50, 100 ideas, then sit down with the list and say, okay, what am I interested in exploring further? As far as which of these has a possibility to work? You're still not deciding if it works yet. You're just deciding, is there a possibility here? And then take those ideas and dig into them a little bit more of well, what if I did this? What would happen? What would that be like? How would I do it? I think so often what happens is when we're trying to solve a problem or look at something differently, we get the idea and we immediately jump in. How do we do that? And we don't know how, and so we dismiss it. Well, I don't know about you, but there are so many things I'm doing today in my life that I didn't know how to do 10, 15 years ago, right? Sometimes I didn't even know how to do last month. And so we constantly we're figuring that out. And usually the how is the easier part, but we don't see that yet.
Right. And we expect to see it immediately. And if we don't, well, then
we dismiss it.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
And sometimes when, if you have a list of things, you might see a connection between things, or you might take bits and pieces of different things. It doesn't have to be a thing. We're so, black and this, or black and white, or yes or no, a lot of times. And
I think that we can train ourselves to be better at that sort of both and mentality. Both of these things can be true at the same time. And we can, for instance, we might not know how to do that. And we might also be able to teach ourselves how to do that, or find someone to teach us. Now that I'm, in my 5th decade, or I'm 49, I have figured out, and I strongly believe that, and this is going to sound almost arrogant, and I don't mean it this way, but I believe I can learn anything. I don't know that I'll be excellent or amazing at it, but I figure, especially today with YouTube and all the stuff you can learn online, it's just phenomenal. So if you don't know how to do that, someone else does, and you can figure it out probably just by watching some videos.
Right. And you don't need to be an expert in everything to figure something out. And you can use experts too.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fantastic, Amy. Okay. I have 2 final questions for you. The first one is, that I ask everyone. What would you tell the younger version of yourself? So Amy today, almost 50 Amy. I'm not going to give you credit for being 50 yet. I just turned 50 last weekend, Amy. Almost 50-year-old Amy. What would she tell the younger version of herself?
So many things. I think the biggest thing might be what we talked about at the beginning, and that I wish I didn't listen to adults as much as I did. I mean, obviously some things, right, are good, but a lot of times adults would give advice, whether it was my parents or family members or whoever, that professor. And it was actually based on their own experience and their own fears and their own ideas of what success looked like that didn't necessarily align with mine. And I wish I had been a bit more bold earlier on to sort of go against the grain a bit, if you will. And yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Everybody's opinion is based upon their own experiences and their own fears. And it's easy to forget that, just lose sight of that, especially when we're just graduating, thinking we're supposed to have it all figured out. La, la, la.
Exactly.
I'm still figuring it out. I don't know about you, Amy.
Oh, for sure. Every year get a little more figured out, but I don't know if it ever ends,
Not quite. Yeah. Okay. Now I would love for you to share where people can find you.
Yes, you can find me. We can start with my website, which is climerconsulting.com. And Climer is spelled Climer. So climerconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Pretty soon you can find me in bookstores or wherever you buy books.
February 26th.
February 26th. Yep. And so, check out the book, Deliberate Creative Teams, How to Lead for Innovative Results. Super excited.
And I love it. Like I said, I've only read the intro so far, and I thought, oh, wow, I can't wait to dig into the book, which I will be buying on February 26th so I can have the hard copy.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to get notified about the book and just, because I don't know about you, but I wouldn't remember. If you go to deliberatecreativeteams.com, then you can sign up and it just goes to me and then I'll send you an email when the book is ready.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I also loved throughout the book, I did look throughout the book, that you have different quotes throughout and just really a lot of inspirational, one-liner thoughts. I love those because sometimes those are the ones that you can kind of cling to and remember, right? And just remind yourself, wait, I'm creative, right? So
yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you like that. I also, the book, it's kind of buried in the text at various points, but there's a bunch of freebies that are included with the book that are, some of the things that we talked about today. There's some more like concrete ways to implement those with your team. And I have some activities in there that you can download, and some like little cheat sheets and stuff like that. So lots of freebies.
Oh, and before we started, you had shared, you have cards of some sort, right? Are these things that you can buy from your site or that, can you share a little bit about those? Because if somebody just wants to think, okay, maybe we're not ready for Amy to come in, but if we could have something to start with, what would you recommend to them?
Yes. So I have this deck of cards that I created. They're called Climer cards. So if you're watching the video
I love it. Those look so cool.
They're really fun. So they're basically the size of, they're like a regular deck of playing cards, that size. And on one side, they're double-sided, but on one side, there are all these like watercolor paintings that I drew. And the purpose...
Wait a minute. I got to stop you. You drew those? And you don't think you draw well?
I recovered from that bad art teacher. And I finally was like, I'm going to draw again.
Well, I love your drawing.
Well, thank you. And you'll see. I mean, if you look at this armadillo, it is a kind of silly, sort of more of a cartoon style. What I learned, and after college, I later went back and took some more art classes. But what I learned is I am not very good at like that highly representational type of drawing. I actually find it exhausting and I don't like doing it. I'm not very good. I'm like a B at it. I can do it sort of, but it's not that good. But I do love this style of just kind of more iconic, kind of graphical type of drawing. That is really fun.
And that is clearly an armadillo. I just want you to know, if I were to draw an armadillo, it would be questionable what sort of animal it was. Maybe you could tell it was an animal. I don't know.
There are probably some listeners that don't even know what an armadillo is.
That's true. That's true. And this is a story I'm telling myself, right? That I can't draw, Amy.
That's right. Well, and here's the thing with drawing is that it's a skill. And so if you want to be good at it, all you have to do is practice it. There's tons of great resources now. And there's one time about 10, maybe almost 15 years ago now, I happened to be in India, and I went to a school. It was like a first to sixth grade. And I walked into the second grade classroom, and the teacher had drawn this like cartoon turtle up on the board. And all of the students were drawing the turtle. And I'm walking around looking at their turtles, and I'm thinking, dang, these are good. And I realized, of course they're good, because drawing a turtle in second grade is the same skill as drawing an alphabet, right? It's just straight lines and curves. The teacher drew it on the board, and you're just copying it. And I was like, oh, the reason so many people in the United States are like freaked out about not being able to draw is because no one taught us. Like, that wasn't even part of our curriculum. And we could have learned this if it had been taught, and we still can, even as adults.
Right.
Yeah. And
so I love that comparison to the alphabet. That's so true.
It's the same thing, right? And so imagine what this country or the world would be like if after you drew the letter A 3 or 4 times, the teacher said, yeah, that is really not looking good. You might as well just give up now. We would all be illiterate. Right? I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It's like laughable. But that's exactly what happens in our class.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm having a lot of ahas here, Amy, and I'll continue.
I love it. Okay, let me tell you quickly how to use Climer cards. So you have all these images, which at first just look like these silly, like drawings, but you lay them down on the table, and then you ask the group a question. So for instance, let's say you're kicking off a team meeting and it's about the budget. Then you might say, everyone pick a card that represents your hope for our budget for the next year. And everyone picks a card, and then you ask each person to share as the meeting begins, which card did you pick and why? And it just starts the conversation in a completely different way. But it's related to what you're talking about. I'm not saying like, oh, everyone pick a card about your favorite vacation, and then let's go talk about the budget. There's kind of a disconnect there.
Right.
So keeping it relevant. And then what happens is then people share things that they would not have shared otherwise, which can be really powerful and helpful. And there's countless ways to use it. I do a free webinar every month on using Climer cards. But anyway, if you want to check them out, I've talked about them in the book. There's some more activities in there. You can go to climercards.com. And again, Climer is Climer.
Oh, I love it. Amy, this has been so much fun. And I'm so excited to read your book that I'm purchasing on February 26th. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we connected. This is just so much fun. And like I said, I feel like we've known each other for quite a while, partially because I do need to share, everyone, because you won't be able to see this. Her books are alphabetized, or I'm sorry, not alphabetized, color-coded behind her, which I greatly appreciate. I just feel like everyone needs to know that.
It's fun.
It's fun.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Amy. I'm going to put all of the information, everyone, in the show notes about how you can find Amy, her cards, the name of her book, all the things. And thank you so much for listening today. The contact information for Amy about how you can find her to speak, do workshops, etc., will all be out there. So thank you so much, Amy, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. Have a great one. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player, tell your friends, and leave us a review. Follow me on my social media platforms highlighted in the show notes, and get in touch with me at thedashmindset.com. Share the topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. We'll see you next time. Design and differentiate your Dash your way and make today amazing.